Welcome to another episode of Data Gurus. This is Sima Vasa, your host. I'm so excited to have Steve Bagdasarian join me today. He is Chief Commercial Officer of Comscore. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate being here.
Yeah, it's so nice. I really enjoyed the chats that we've had before, and I'm glad we could have a chance to record some of it.
Yeah, look, there's nothing more fun than geeking out in and around measurement data. So if we can get to that today in a good way, then it's a good way to start the afternoon.
Well, although I think measurement is now out of the geeky category, more into here's a competitive advantage category.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, I think we're going through a moment in time where measurement data being applied proactively to media strategy is becoming a reality, right? We're seeing the traditional worlds converge with the digital worlds, and it's producing these data sets that you can actually do something with. And I think that is it makes it feel tangible, it makes it feel advantaged, right? To have those in your hands. So yeah, we're definitely we're coming into the cooler spaces now, and where art meets science.
Totally, and I love it because I think it actually shows, and we'll talk more about this, the true value of unlocking the value of the data that helps in activation and really helping buyers and brands have more thoughtful buying strategies.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, before we jump in, obviously listeners probably can already guess that you love the space, but just give a little bit of your background for people who are not familiar with you.
Yeah. So I've been in the space for a while. I think one of the fun things about people in the media, whether it's on the advertising side, media content side, or ad tech measurement and so forth, that everybody has an interesting story about how they ended up here. Nobody intended to ever be here, right? Uh, Here, I shouldn't say no one. Very few people just knew from the outstretch this is where they're going to be from an industry and career standpoint. Originally, passion was to work in the music industry, and fell into to kind of the marketing ecosystem, and found a lot of the enjoyment that I anticipated getting out of the entertainment industry through the lens of advertising and in the science that supported it. And it was the science that supported it that kind of motivated the second half of my career. But I started off in kind of traditional agency world, all right? And I worked in the IPG family. And I loved it. It was a great experience. I was very fortunate at the time to be working for an agency that at the time was winning a ton of new business and required a much more dedicated focus into the digital capabilities at the time. This is the early 2000s. As a technology enthusiast, I was always fascinated by the rise of search marketing, and I was very, very enthused by what mobile phones I believed were going to kind of bring forth. And had an opportunity to kind of get in the middle of some of these newer offerings, more from an evangelism standpoint than anything. But as budgets started to flow in, to be able to put those dollars to work in the early days, it was amazing. Getting pitched by the traditional players, the Nokias and the BlackBerries of the world, and then all of a sudden iPhone shows up on stage, and it's a completely different conversation. Yeah, so I got to this point in my agency tenure where I was just very fascinated by the tech and the science that was behind it. Moved into startup land, was part of an early stage startup. We had a fantastic run, couple employees to several hundred, very large nine-figure business. It got very much more exposed to the advertising and media landscape globally. And then from there, was really dedicated that the future of this business was going to be predicated around the use case of data.
Right.
Over and helped build the media business at Publishers Clearinghouse, which, an iconic American brand, but one that people don't understand or appreciate has the data scalability that is almost unmatched outside of the large walled gardens. And we built a very interesting business from there. And then about 18 months ago, transitioned to Comscore. And came in to kind of, understand the business, learn a little bit more about where we could see some growth tentacles for the future of where Comscore goes, and have been here ever since. So it's been an evolutionary run in my career, but it's followed a trajectory of just interest and curiosity as this space evolves.
Yeah, and I think also it's it's never boring, right? Because as the landscape continues to evolve and change, to your point, curiosity comes into play, and you just keep learning more and more and trying to figure out where that evolution is going to be.
Absolutely.
So, we've talked about this, like people continue to talk about quote unquote the waste in advertising, dollars not really being able to understand where the money's going. Has it been impactful? Is it effective? We've talked about digital playing such a bigger and prominent role. What other trends are you seeing in the ad measurement space that are really kind of changing the way you're thinking about measurement?
Yeah, I think there's two things that stand out in particular that really are just going to encapsulate the immediate future. And I think they're going to have important ramifications of how we think about, you know, building the right consumer experience on a go-forward basis from an advertising supported perspective. One is ad format, right? So, short form content, short form video, absolutely has a place.
Right.
Creator-led content, right? Replacing in some cases what we've considered historically more premium-oriented video is absolutely taking hold. And I think those are realities, right? The format by which consumers are receiving content also dictates by which the advertisements need to support it. And then the other one, which to me is, it's a no-brainer, right? In the concept of performant media, right? This whole concept of waste, and we're moving more towards an outcome-oriented culture, I think, in the industry across the board. But this attentiveness towards locality, right?
Okay.
Precision,
Yes.
and to me, it's more of a representativeness of the convergence of media channels happening, right?
Okay.
If you think about this, right, search, social, traditional digital, these are inherently local advertising mechanisms
Right.
because they're at the person level, they're at the individual level, the household, right? Where you are influenced, where you are making your decisions at the end state, which doctor am I going to go see, which candidate I'm potentially going to vote for, what I'm going to buy for this weekend's barbecue when I host people, right? These things are within the vicinity of where you live. And so as we translate these very large national messages down to the most precise market level, this role of how granular can I go with my measurement to inform how I optimize my media mix is really, in my opinion, catapulting this movement towards true performance outcomes that we really haven't been able to embrace to date.
Very cool. Let me ask you about that, because as you talked about the layers of data and getting down to a personal, anonymized personal data set, let's say, to improve targeting and performance, what do you see a barrier with the consumer in the future providing so much data, throwing off that data to inform advertisers as to where they should target their ads?
But yeah, look, I think if there's any certainty in this market, I think the reality of regulation and privacy inherences are going to continue to unfold. I
Right.
think it's consumers, right? Where I look at the generations that are now coming into kind of consumer decisioning demographics, and they are just inherently digital by nature. They understand aspects of what they're giving and what they're not. But I do think it's one of these things where there will be data winners and there'll be data losers. I think what happens in the middle is how best we can take certain parts of signals and translate those into acceptable privacy-centric ways of inferring the best behavior, right? Endemically tying advertising to the content that's being consumed to be impactful within that moment, because that is your time to be able to introduce yourself to your consumers. So signal loss is very real. But I also think the reality is we've seen that this business can thrive in areas where there is signal loss. I mean, only 40 to 50% of inventory out there digitally has real signal attached to it. Now, cookies have been kind of hung out
Right.
there, and those are going to be deprecated over a period of time. But true kind of first party signal, it's a limited world, and I think there's this opportunity for. And I think this is where the conversations around, like, where is AI coming into the mix, right? This is the longer term state of where this goes.
Right.
But as signal loss comes down, it doesn't mean that the industry, basically collapses. It
Yeah.
just means technology gets smarter in and around it.
And to break it down, just for everybody's for listeners, signal loss means what? as you think about it. I don't think everybody would know that.
Sure, that's fair. Signal loss is basically, we can call them like deterministic identifiers, right? Things that are like concrete identifiers to know that Steve Bagdasarian was on this website, and then Steve Bagdasarian went to this e-commerce website, right? And there's just been this historical linkage, and there was a significant period of
That
time,
fire, mobile phone, or whatever.
yeah, hashed emails, right? Things that IP addresses, things
Yep.
that allowed a connection, right,
Sure.
between one thing to the next. And the fact of the matter is, there has been a period of time where that data has been overly used,
Yeah.
without people totally understanding the full capacity of how it was being used. And even though it was being used in the vast majority of cases in a very compliant way,
Right.
it's intrusive, right? And I think there is a reality that the consumer, as they get smarter and they understand their data is the most valuable asset going into this, is going to be more restrictive with their information. And I think there's a lot of laws and regulatory situations that are going to infuse that, whether or not the consumer, is fully all the way there, because we're going to have to out anticipate some of these things. But it's just the reality of the advertising industry if you're in it.
You mentioned something about the younger generation, just growing up digitally native, and they're more aware of the data that they produce. Are you seeing differences in data collection as it relates to those younger consumers? Like, you're working harder to collect it because they might be smarter about truly what they're giving, quote unquote, giving away, or alternatively, enhancing their own consumer experience.
Yeah, so I would say, just to maybe generalize in the way that is the best to maybe frame it,
Okay.
they're they're more committed to certain environments where they're going to fully invest
Got
their
it.
footprint,
Yep.
right? But they're not going to just throw their email around for any random article, because they're going to figure out a way to be able to get to it without having to get past the paywall and so
Right.
forth. And so I think there's a real trade-off that we have to think about in terms of what the future looks like. And again, a lot of this goes back to the content and the experience that you're providing to your end consumer. Is it valuable enough for them to trade something in return? And I think that's just the part where we're going to continue to see consumers go deeper in certain pockets and not
Yeah.
be as broad as we maybe have been as an economy in the past.
Makes sense. It just depends on the quid pro quo or the value exchange there.
Exactly. Exactly.
Um, so obviously you joined Comscore recently, and there's probably lots to do there. Can you give us an idea of kind of what is Comscore really, what are they currently focused on, and how are they different from other providers in the industry?
Totally. So Comscore is one of the OGs in the space, if you will, right? We're celebrating 25 years this summer. And the company was born out of the premise of helping establish independence in measurement, specifically for the digital ecosystem, back when websites, were popping up all over the place, and there needed to be a way to validate how many people were actually seeing the websites, how many people were seeing that within these age demographics. And then as the business began to evolve during the rapid ascent of the digital economy, in 2016, digital Comscore and a television version called RenTrack came together to form what is now the assets that underlie the core of Comscore today. Think about Comscore essentially in kind of four buckets, right? One is traditional television measurement, right? Most companies are familiar with Comscore and Nielsen in that capacity. There are some other competitors that have entered that market, but the job there is to essentially help measure content distribution, as well as the consumption that happens on the other side of it. The other side of the business, as I was referring to earlier, is the digital measurement business. That is the legacy business of Comscore, still exists. Most of the digital economy still relies very heavily on the numbers that we produce on a monthly basis to validate the ability for them to sell the value of their audiences based on the number of people that are going to their particular websites. Now, as those two kind of stalwarts of Comscore have existed,
Right.
there's extensions that come out of them. There's a custom analytics business that operates more as a data as a service operation these days. But the focus of where we ultimately go and the future of this business is oriented around cross-platform measurement. And it's
Okay.
been a topic in the industry for years.
Yes.
But much like the years of mobile when I was in it, and people talked about how it become a significant medium or
Right.
social, it takes consumer behavior to ultimately put these things into action. And so for us, what we look at is the role of reach and frequency measurement in advertising as being absolutely critical to that end state performance outcome that a marketer wants. And so what we do with that is we take the combined assets, and it allows for us to look at a complete view to understand what's being consumed in television. Did it under or overperform? What's being consumed in connected television? What's being consumed within digital or social or gaming and so forth? And be able to present that as a full measured picture back to the brand to say, hey, look, you might have under-delivered a little bit in this market with television,
Right.
but you delivered in CTV. Maybe you want to shift that media mix up when you go into the next iteration of your plan. Or if you're running these channels programmatically, while your television's running, you could optimize these other channels to change up that media mix so that the end state is you reached who you wanted to reach in full capacity with limited ad dollar waste.
Very cool. And what's like you just described a great use case. What does that look like for the buyer? Like, is this all real time? They're looking at statistics and understanding what's going on in television and then adjusting the programmatic platforms. How does that work?
Yeah, so we're uniquely differentiated than other measurement companies
Right.
because we are built on this underlying foundation of big data, right?
Right.
Is the classic terminology. But essentially, we take in the measured state of 1 in 3 televisions in the U.S., uh, hundreds of millions of connected devices, both connected TV, desktop environments, mobile environments. We've taken all of these raw data assets and we normalize them. And what
Right.
that allows for us to do is to process that data at a speed and at a level of granularity that nobody else can provide. Now, that's what goes into the basis of the methodology behind our measurement. In terms of the nature of how fast we do it, because we're processing the raw data assets and we have the ability to turn the speed out, we can do it faster than anybody else, which opens up the door for programmatic. So when I showed up at Comscore, one of the interesting things that somebody pointed out of the gate, and it's funny, as at that point, I'd been a 15-year customer of Comscore, and I didn't really appreciate this fact of data processing and speed. 48 hours into a flight of a traditional television campaign, Comscore is 95% accurate to the post out, meaning the end state of the measurement output of that campaign, right? So if I tell you that you're underperforming in Wichita, Kansas, 48 hours into a flight of a campaign, post campaign, you're going to underperform by what I was telling you about, right?
Right.
So we know there's confidence.
Right.
So it's a great stat for television. But the
Okay.
programmatic and kind of the digital individual myself said that's an optimization opportunity. Because if I know 48 hours into a flight of a campaign that I'm underperforming or overperforming, I can adjust all my non-linear environments during that flight to make up that differential so that I end up in the best state that I can be coming out of it.
Very
So
cool.
it's the speed and it's the consistency and it's the breadth by which we can provide that.
Fantastic. Um, who's on the other end of the buying side as a Comscore client? So, like, describe the person that would be consuming a lot of the services that you provide.
Historically, we have been oriented around the supply side, meaning the national networks, local broadcasters, web-based publishers, and so forth. And the reason being is that measurement historically has been serviced out of the seller's dollars, if you will, right,
Yes.
to
Yep.
justify the buy in and of itself. But as the world has changed towards, this proactivity of how do I make sure that I'm spending my dollars most, efficiently? How do I deal with signal loss? How do I deal with these things? The buy side has really started to lean in, and they're using these tools because they have other tools that allow for them to change the campaign during the flight.
Got
And
it.
so for us, it's, the buyers tend to orient around, major agency clients,
Yep.
right? The brands are absolutely involved, but the agencies ultimately are doing the hard work. And then our sell side clients that for years have not felt that they've had the pricing or the packaging power on their combined assets to be able to put something forth versus very siloed versions of the media. Here's my linear television offering. Oh, by the way, here's my digital stuff, right? And those two things never really fit together until you had a measurement product that was able to bring those two pieces together. So it's a two-sided scenario, but the buy side started to lean in recently because they know they can do more with the controls that they have.
Got it. Yeah, very interesting. I would be remiss in not asking you about how do you think AI impacts the world of ad measurement, media measurement?
Yeah. So, I mean, first and foremost, right? If you're any sort of technology company playing with large data sets and you know, artificial intelligence isn't baked into the roadmaps, you are absolutely, missing out on the future state of efficiency in terms of just processing and data inflow and outflow. We're still at an early stage, though, in reality, in terms of the practicality of that being applied in every case. It absolutely represents the future of how we think about data processing and data management. But the application right now, at least as I've seen it in our industry, is more oriented around creative iterations. And there is some movement towards AI driven, targeting and segmentation strategies that are starting to be put in place. It's still early though, but it absolutely represents a reality that anybody's going to have to deal with as we think about just the massively disparate data sets, especially in a privacy centric orientation of how you get all these things to work together. You're going to have machines do a lot of the heavy lifting.
Well, yeah, there's too much data actually at some point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, Steve, thank you so much for joining me today. I truly enjoyed our conversation. I know I've learned something, so hopefully our listeners would have done the same. Appreciate it.
I appreciate the time. Thank you.